Hi Bio20, welcome to the final section of Bio20, the 4 chapters of ecology. And we're starting with chapter 1.1 and energy in the biosphere. And biosphere is where all life exists, bio meaning life in Latin. And those 4 areas would be the air, land, and water. So air is the atmosphere, land is the geosphere, and water is the hydrosphere. So the opener talks about the depletion of the polar ice caps and how that's been measured to confirm that there actually is a downward trend in square kilometers of polar ice caps, and unless we take care of the emissions of greenhouse gases causing the warming and greenhouse effect of the earth, they fear that that will continue to deplete in the future. So our starting formula here is talking about a formula you're familiar with from chapter 5, a formula of cellular respiration and how we need the sunlight that drives photosynthesis, which will make the glucose and oxygen that will be the raw materials for us to do cellular respiration and make our 36 ATP. So you guys remember this, our glucose and oxygen is the 2 components we need to make our ATP, and those byproducts are CO2 and H2O. And of course the photosynthesis reaction is the exact opposite of that, where plants, primarily plants, and a few other things, algae and bacteria, but primarily plants, take that carbon dioxide and water, and because of the sun, they can make us that glucose and oxygen, the chemical energy. So looking at the amount of radiant energy hitting the earth, 30% of it is actually reflected, and you will have to know this word albedo. That is the amount of reflected energy. So with thick clouds, there's a high reflective amount, like 90%. If it's a dark area like forest or dark concrete pavement, that will actually absorb a lot of energy and get really, really hot. So it doesn't have a very high albedo. It's a low albedo because it's absorbing. So remember, albedo means reflecting. And it mentions here that 51% of our sunlight does actually come down to Earth and warm the planet, 19% absorbed by the water, and there's a couple percent that surprisingly is only used by the producers. And we often think that much more is used by the plants of the earth and algae of the and photosynthesizers of the sea, the plankton, but it's actually only 1 to 2% that is of the sunlight that's actually used by producers. And this just shows you some of the things that would reflect a lot. Remember, albedo is how much it reflects. And so things that reflect a lot would be things like snow and thick clouds. And the things with low amounts would actually be absorbing. So the ocean absorbs and pavement absorbs in forests. They absorb a lot of energy. Producers, a term you may have heard before, are autotrophs, meaning they automatically make their own food, which refers to photosynthesizing. And we've also got some chemosynthesizers. And so photosynthesis means that chlorophyll is used to capture the sun's energy and make chemical bonds of glucose. But chemosynthesizers are actually using chemical nutrients to make themselves energy. And so, for example, H2S is used by the bacteria in tube worms at the deep sea vents. They wondered how food chain was started in that deep of an area, and they realized there were bacteria living off H2S. And we have kind of a unique situation where that chemical is the only nutrient they need, and other bacteria actually can even use ammonium for their energy source. So this is an area where H2S was starting a food chain, kind of a surprising find by scientists. So those bacteria are living in these tube worms and able to use H2S for their energy source. So here's a look at how carbon dioxide, water, and H2S is able to be used to make them carbs, and their sulfuric acid as a byproduct, comparing that to plants using CO2 and H2O with the sunlight and making carbs and oxygen. Seeing how that compares. What happens in this deep vent is that with those chemosynthesizers, they then are eaten by things like tube worms, shrimps, and crabs, which are then eaten by the higher level consumers like fish or octopus or shrimp, snails, lobsters. So this starts this food chain right from H2S. So consumers are considered heterotrophs, and they have to consume other organisms for energy like humans do. And primary consumers, sometimes you'll see it in a picture indicated like this. Primary consumers are the ones that eat producers. So we'd start a food chain with producers, and your arrow is eaten by the primary consumers, and those primary consumers will be eaten by secondary consumers, and then it can go up from there. And it would just, that arrow always means is eaten by. So remember, it starts with a producer that can use the sunlight, and then whatever eats that plant, and it could even be you, but there could be something that eats the plant. Then secondary consumer would be whatever eats the primary, third order consumer, whatever eats the secondary, and it would, food chain goes up from there. And the examples, I guess I could go back here, but you guys can imagine, on land, something like a rabbit or something can be something that eats grass, could be a primary consumer. In the water, these are usually like small fish going up to bigger fish. But in deep open vents, it would be like those tube worms that we talked about that ate bacteria that were in this category, and usually other plants are in the category of producers. And then secondary consumers, they're often carnivores, so things like hawks or wolves or even humans. And tertiary consumers, if we're looking at ocean vents, it might be octopus or something like lobster. Looking at decomposers that break up those organisms, these decomposers, first of all, can be found at every level of the end of the food chain. And they would be things like bacteria or fungi, worms, insects, anything that breaks up the dead and decaying organisms and bring those organic materials back to the soil so that plants can use them again. So those materials, those minerals do also cycle because of decomposers bringing those materials back into our soil. So looking at the food chain, when you see that the sunlight is used by producers and then by consumers, realizing that everywhere, both of the producers and consumers can be broken down by decomposers, and those little molecules are fed back into the soil so plants can use them. It kind of shows you that all these materials all cycle. And so they mention now that Earth is a closed system in terms of matter, because matter is always being cycled on Earth. However, for energy, there is a flow of energy. So the sunlight is coming in and going into our plants, then our animals, and then there's heat given off. So we have to realize that there's a closed system for energy, but closed system for matter, but open for energy. And to finish off our topic, first law of thermodynamics, you've heard many times, I'm sure, energy is not created or destroyed, but can change from one form to another form. So our chemical energy, that's food, can be turned into mechanical energy that your muscles can move, and then heat energy, things like that. And second law of thermodynamics is that every time there's a conversion, energy is lost and less energy is available for the next conversion. And so because no conversion is 100% efficient, that brings us to our next topic, which will be about energy pyramids and why they are a pyramidal shape. And we will talk about that in our next video lesson. Bye for now.